Yet again, Carlton, back for another episode of Content is for Closers. This week we've got Rachel Cantor on. Before we get to her, I wanted to ask you, what is your newsletter diet like these days?
That's a great question. Newsletters are hard because the better they get, the more problematic they become for achieving inbox zero. And I'm subscribed to some good ones. So, um, yeah, I think like Shane Parrish, that's a
It's
enjoyable
Knowledge
one for
Project.
me. That I have a hard time, swiping and archiving if I haven't
That's
read
the
it.
Knowledge Project one.
There's a
Is that
few
who?
other,
Yeah.
yeah, that's Knowledge Project. Yeah, there's a few other ones that I really enjoy, and it's like most of the time, if I haven't reached inbox zero, it's because of the newsletters that I'm waiting to jump in on
Did
and
you
and
uh
read.
did you find
Um,
yourself adding, or I think there's like one of two ways people went during COVID and subsequently. Either they added a ton of newsletters, that's the camp that I'm in, or I've met some people who curated would be the nice way to say it, or like got rid of newsletters entirely. It was so overwhelming that they just kind of got rid of everything except maybe one or two. Which way did you go?
yeah, I definitely added, and I'm an avid unsubscriber. Like if something's not providing value, uh, or if it's like shouldn't be in my inbox, I'm like
Yeah.
unsubscribe right away. But with some of these newsletters, they're great content. They're good writing, and it's just hard to find time sometimes to read all of them, especially if they come out, weekly or
Yeah, well,
biweekly.
obviously today's guest, Rachel Cantor, got her start in the newsletter space. She started a newsletter during COVID. She tells the whole story on the episode here, and leveraged that along with just posting on Twitter to get a job at Morning Brew, which is like the newsletter company. Pretty crazy how she was able to do that. What were some of the takeaways that you had from the conversation?
Yeah, so she's a great writer, and she's had a ton of experience at some major companies that are doing really innovative content. And so I think it's interesting. She presents a couple of different ideas, but one takeaway that I had from the conversation was that there is low hanging fruit or low hanging content that's easy to get at, and then there is very difficult and um, there's content that's hard to develop and you have
Mm.
to dig deeper for. And it seems like she's really developed a great process for digging deeper and finding. Adam just broke his chair if you aren't watching YouTube.
Something
Uh,
always happens in these intros without fail.
yeah.
Sorry about that. Continue.
Just got to keep it interesting. Um, so it's finding ways to dig past those easy content pieces that are kind of the first content pieces that companies usually create. And so she gives a few examples of how she digs and how she figures out some of these interesting content pieces. So she talks about a method using sticky notes and kind of having conversations with people that will help her discover some of those nuggets that allow her to create interesting pieces
Yeah,
of
I was
content.
super challenged coming away from this conversation about a bunch of things. But the first part of that, what you were talking about, I think the low hanging fruit is something that obviously has become almost ubiquitous on the internet. You can find a dozen of the same interview or a dozen of the same show concept within any given niche. And what Rachel's done is taken such a deep dive, and you described the sticky note process, but she has a very specific system to uncover better ideas, deeper ideas. She goes into one case study. We kind of did a live brainstorm that I think people will enjoy. And to be honest, I think it's something that we need to do better at with our content and in our company. So super challenged with that personally. Before we get to the episode, you guys know what time it is. We have to do it every single week. This week's 5-star review comes from Builder B. The title is Real Entrepreneurs Actionable Insights. Like that so far. Adam and Carlton do a great job of peeling back the layers and getting creators to open up and share their stories. Keep them coming. 5 stars. Appreciate that, Builder B. appreciate the 5-star review. I appreciate you who are listening, pulling out your phone right now to give us a 5-star review as well.
Right now. If you don't
It
do it
doesn't
right
count.
now,
Yeah,
it's
then
not
I'm not
going to
going to read
happen.
it. I'll know somehow.
Maybe we need to up the stakes, Adam. Maybe we need to give away like cash or something, or if the price of Bitcoin goes low enough, we can just give away a whole
Yeah.
Bitcoin.
Well, what I'll give away right now is Luna. If anyone wants to give a
Yeah.
review, I'll give you a lot of
Oh man.
Lunas. I don't think it's going to exist by the time this comes out, so I think it's a safe bet. But yeah, maybe we need
Oh.
to increase the stakes. But you know what we should do? We need to have a
Hey,
brainstorm, Rachel Cantor style, to figure out what the best idea here would be.
we should to get out some sticky notes. The other thing I will say is, I was actually a little excited yesterday. For those who aren't in the Web3 crypto space, this may not be that interesting, but I've had it on my to do list for like 2 or 3 months to buy a bunch of Luna. So that's like one thing I'm thankful has stayed
What a
on my
great
to do list.
procrastination! Like
And I even like made it through several of the steps because it wasn't on the exchange I do most of my trading on. And so thankfully we didn't get that far. I mean,
that
yeah, we won't. We'll stop that
worked out well
discussion
for
here.
you. Well, if you don't want to just be frozen in decision making, you want to process to help you think through ideas deeply. So you don't want to be on either side. I'm too reactive. I go for the easiest, lowest hanging fruit. Carlton maybe takes a little too much time baking ideas. Rachel provides the blueprint for figuring out exactly how to come up with a good idea. Let's get into the interview with her. On this episode, we're joined by Rachel Cantor, newsletter extraordinaire, Morning Brew alum, and the brand and content lead at Tydo. Rachel's had an explosive start to her career. We discussed her journey from graduating in the middle of COVID to launching a personal newsletter, getting noticed on Twitter, and then getting hired at the king of newsletter companies, the Morning Brew. We also get into the details of how she finds deep content ideas that connect with her audience. And Rachel walks us through a recent brainstorm she did for a new Tydo content series live right here on the show. I absolutely loved getting to know Rachel, hearing her story, and learn from her skills. And I know you will too. Let's dive in with Rachel Cantor from Tydo. All right, welcome back in to Content is for Closers after several tries. Rachel Cantor, thank you so much for joining us. It took us a little bit to get here. I'm going to be honest. It was a little bit of an uphill battle,
It did.
but
A little bit. Just a little bit.
but we made it. We're here, and thank you for making time. Before we get into too deep into the interview, I noticed, I can't remember where I saw this, but you are a lover of fiction. I saw somewhere, and
Yes.
Twitter maybe, and I am as well. I've never asked this question on the show before, but I would be curious what you have read recently or are looking forward to reading this summer, in the fiction category. Anything that's top of mind?
I just finished reading No One Is Talking About This by
Okay.
Patricia Lockwood, which was very interesting. I would not say it's my favorite read, but I do think it has a lot to do about internet culture and
Mm.
what it means to be online and how that impacts society and also how we go about our lives. And that was fascinating. But my favorite fiction read recently has been A Little Life. Have you read it?
Mm-mm. No.
Okay, it's a great book
Okay.
by Hanya Yanagihara. I think I'm pronouncing her name correctly, but it follows a group of four friends from college throughout their entire life, and it's probably the saddest book I've ever read. I'm
Oh
gonna be
no.
honest up front. Like I think it is, and I'm not a sad book person. Like I read fiction because I want to escape from everything
Yeah.
and like be offline. But that being said, it is one of the most well written, most like the characters are developed in the most beautiful way, and then it has this amazing theme around friendship, and I really learned a lot about friendship from it, so I would
Okay.
highly recommend
Okay. That
that.
was A
But
Little Life.
you will cry.
Oh man, that's a tough knowing that going in. That
I
A
know.
Little Life, and then what was the other one about internet culture? Nobody.
No one is talking about this.
Okay.
It's written almost, she wrote the entire book from her iPhone.
Oh wow. Okay. I'm going to Virginia this weekend, and I was looking for a book. I was specifically waiting for this conversation to get my next read. So I'll report back on how sad I am after I've read them. But anyway, thanks for nerding out with me on that. So Rachel, you have had quite an experience already, and we should say our mutual friend Rachel Braun connected us. Shout out Rachel, and so I think you started off similar to Rachel in some ways, in that you were able to leverage Twitter in order to kind of kick off your career, spend some time at Morning Brew. We'll get into what you're doing now at Tydo, but take us back to the Twitter experience and kind of how that helped you launch into what you're doing now.
Totally. So I graduated in 2020, and I always liked writing, but I didn't see myself becoming a writer at all, quite honestly. But I've always been that friend people go to for recommendations. So I did kind of what
Okay.
everyone did throughout the pandemic, and I started my own newsletter.
Mm.
And I started building it organically. It was just a passion project. I had no ambition for it to become a job. I had no ambition for it to grow into a major audience. It was just something I loved doing. And I was new to Twitter. I was kind of poking around, finding content, following people I admired in different spaces. And then one day I threw out a tweet. It's kind of funny looking back at the exact tweet, but I literally said something like, check out my newsletter. It features, and I tagged Morning Brew. I think I tagged Scott Galloway, honestly, because I included maybe one of his podcasts
Mm.
and then a brand I loved. And the managing editor, Neil, saw my tweet, read my newsletter, loved it, and then cold DM'd me about my
Wow.
job, which was really wild.
Yeah.
It doesn't usually happen that way.
I feel like that's like, when some people will send out a tweet being like, I hope this gets me a job. And like in the dream scenario, you get the managing editor in the first tweet and the DM. So it just worked out for you that way.
Yeah, I mean, definitely props to Neil because he's like in the DMs monitoring that, seeing things and always reading, like all just constantly learning and reading.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really a testament to him and also to the brew and the kind of culture they've built there too. But I think the one thing that it did teach me from that experience is to always put what you create out into the world.
Mm.
I know we talk a lot about building in public, and it can kind of be it's hard, right? Like you're building something and you're like scared to share it with everyone, and I've totally been there. But I think even if you're building something and it's imperfect, that's part of the process, and people are more attracted to the messiness and imperfect nature of it, I would
Mm-hmm.
say, because over time you'll refine it and build it. But the fact that you're out there, one, it's an opportunity to grow an audience. Two, it's an opportunity to grow your brand. And three, you never know what's going to come from it. So I really learned to put things out into the world. And I wasn't always like that. I think I had this kind of negative self talk around self promotion.
Mm.
I was just because it's like sometimes a little cringy when you're like promoting your own stuff. Um, and I don't know if I've seen people who promote their own stuff and it's in a way that,
Oh,
um,
100%. I mean, yeah,
it's like,
it's very difficult to do.
it's hard. But then I think I had a friend kind of reframe it for me where she was like, what you're actually creating is adding value to people. And the fact that you're not sharing it is a missed opportunity for
Mm.
people. So if you share what you think is adding value, then it's not really like self promotion. It's not really necessarily comes from like that selfish, like ego driven place. You're actually um, trying to help people and
Yeah.
also simultaneously like share the cool stuff you're doing.
Yeah, I think that broke for me somewhat early in my career. My first job was a terrible job, and that you had to like make like 100 phone cold calls a day, like that type of
Oh
job.
yeah.
And and so the sales manager would try to tell us to reframe as well, like you're not bothering them, you're not pestering them, you're trying to help them improve their business or whatever, which for that really wasn't the case. But just learning that reframing, uh you know anything I do on Twitter or anything I do on LinkedIn is just so much less painful because of that experience. But that reframing is super important. So I would say, yes, testament to Neil, but also testament to you, of obviously what you wrote had meaning or impact or quality to some degree that he was interested immediately. What was your newsletter about?
It was all recommendations, kind of similar to like what I ended up building out at the brew, but it was a combination also of personal narrative and like the things I was experiencing as a new grad during the pandemic and the questions I was asking myself, but
Mhm.
also go-to brands that I've been loving, trends around pop culture, like why are we seeing so many non-alcoholic brands, or
Oh, cool.
um, and then like what is this meme format that's going around, or why is there this massive Google Doc of icebreakers, and like sharing fun things too. Like it got people through a lot of like dark days during the
Yeah, like
pandemic as well.
a fun look at what was going on online. So you leverage that. You started working at the brew, and what were you doing at Morning Brew when you were there?
So when I joined, they launched a newsletter called The Essentials. They launched that in April 2020, and that spun out of a section in the daily newsletter, the one that's the massive, um, over like 3 million subscribers now
Right.
newsletter. But they had this section in the daily that was called, I think it was called like the Daily Planner, and it was like things to do during the pandemic when everyone was going stir crazy. And because that was like the most clicked upon section in the newsletter, they ended up building something called the Essentials, which was all focused on how to stay happy and healthy during the pandemic, and just internet culture. It was kind of like that cool friend keeping you in the know. And all of the writers at Morning Brew were rotating through writing that on top of their existing verticals. So
Mm.
it was a lot of work. And they also like didn't have um they were finding things and kind of curating what they were reading, but it also wasn't necessarily their specialty in a lot of ways. So they were like, "Oh, we're running out of things." And simultaneously, the brew was noticing like this newsletter is performing really well. I think there's an opportunity here to build a lifestyle focused newsletter and tap into what is the life of the modern business leader outside of just business news. And so when I joined, I took over writing the essentials. And then while I was doing that, we were developing what would be Essentials 2.0, which turned into Sidekick. So
Oh,
it was like,
cool.
how do we take what worked in the essentials, what didn't work, like what do we want to do more of, what fits the modern business leader, and then create that into like a brand new brand identity, newsletter design, and all of that. And
Yeah.
then launch Sidekick and wrote that there.
Wow, that was a huge product to just take over right off right off the bat. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Building a newsletter from the ground up is a really interesting process, and one that I loved. I loved
Yeah, okay, so
doing
let's talk
that.
a little bit about that. I feel like so like you mentioned, 2020, there were just newsletters galore. Everyone started newsletters, every brand started a newsletter, and a lot of people got, I think, frustrated early on with it seemed like if you didn't get like initial hockey stick growth, then it was difficult sometimes to sustain or to grow a brand. What did you learn through that experience about growing an audience through a newsletter?
For my personal newsletter, I just learned that consistency is key. And I know time and time again people say that, but it's really true. It's like you have to keep writing and you have to keep doing it. Um, and that's how you get better. That's how you grow an audience. And then that's also how you learn what works and doesn't work.
Mm.
Um, at the brew, everything we did from the beginning was audience driven. And I think that's super important. I always say when you're starting a personal newsletter, I don't think you necessarily have to worry about that because that can kind of get into your psyche a little bit. And I would say create like what you want to create and build what you think like will add value. And then from there, you could tap into the audience and iterate. Sometimes people are too focused on what other people want at
Hmm.
the start, and again that gets into like why are you starting a newsletter in the first place. You should probably like know what why you're starting it and also how it's going to be different because like you said it's a crowded space.
Yeah. So let's
um
say you're thinking of it from a brand's perspective. What does that mean when you say it's what was the term you said? Audience led or audience
Audience driven.
driven? Yeah. What does that
Hmm.
mean?
From the perspective of the brew or just like any brand really.
Yeah, just like not necessarily a personal newsletter, but yeah, from a brand's perspective, who's trying to start a newsletter.
Yeah, I think so. One, you should ask yourself like what is the purpose of the newsletter? So is it to drive leads? Is it to build a community?
Mm.
Is it to spotlight existing customers or users, and think about, or to establish yourself as a thought leader in a space? And that's what you want to do. So I think thinking through that, and then the other piece is the audience. And so I guess what I mean when I say don't necessarily start with the audience with a personal newsletter, because that's like really driven from you.
Mhm.
But then with a brand and something like Brew, obviously you have to think about audience, and obviously you have to think about growth. It's business. And so diving into actually talking to audience members, like I spent a lot of time in my early days when I joined Morning Brew. I read through every past edition, and then I also read through the inbox. And Brew is a unique place in that there are a lot of reader replies.
Mhm.
But I went through almost every email and I started collecting feedback. And I'm a big post-it note fan, so I was like post-it noting all over, grouping the different types of feedback into
Mm.
different things, like and then figuring out what are the patterns there. And then I would actually like hop on the phone with readers who loved the newsletter, and
Really?
then I would ask them like, yeah, it was actually super fun.
Yeah.
We did all of this like it was basically like how you build a product at a tech company,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
doing user feedback and all that. And that was really fun because you learn about people's media habits and how they consume. And then also you can figure out kind of like where you fit into the picture, because obviously there's the issue of there's so many newsletters, there's so much to consume. So how can you best serve the audience? So that's kind of what I mean by diving into that.
I love that. I love how like old school that is, and just like you were grouping in with paper and pen the clusters of feedback that would come through, and then literally talking to humans. I feel like that gets left out so much in content today. When you said
Yeah.
it, I had like this vision of, have you seen Horrible Bosses, when Charlie Kelly's like trying to figure out something and he's got all the post-it notes and the strings all over? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I know what you're talking about.
Okay.
I haven't seen it, but I know exactly what you're talking
That's
about.
the mental image I got of what you were trying to do to map all that. But that's such a great exercise to go through.
That literally was it. I call it a Post-it note party. I will like block out time in my calendar to do it. I do it with almost all pieces of content, like large pieces of content.
Yeah. Going into publishing the content, you do it based on like past feedback, or
I do it for like brainstorming
Mm,
different content series, and then also for like the larger strategy and then like distribution of it.
very cool. Well, that's super helpful. Okay, so you did that. You were at the Morning Brew for a while. You had some good time, obviously, and learned a lot. And then at some point, you transitioned to where you are now, which is Tydo. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And you sent me. I was looking a little bit at this new content series, and I wanted to get into your brain around this a little bit. Well, maybe you could just set the table and explain what it is that you all just launched, the content series you just launched.
Totally. So we launched this content series called Tydo Tables, and the whole purpose of it is really this core question, which is like, what if we gathered really niche groups of direct to consumer founders and operators in a single room to have one single roundtable conversation? What would come of that, and what types of unique opportunities, questions, and problems are they facing in their niche? And
Mhm.
then how do we create that experience? And then how do we turn that into really amazing insights and content?
Okay, and then also, what does Tydo provide as a company?
Tydo, it's an e-commerce enablement tool that helps direct-to-consumer brands better understand their data and analytics, and then make smarter decisions and leverage that data into action.
Yeah. So what I loved about this was, first of all, obviously D2C founders and operators are essentially your target customer, and for the most part, I would imagine. And
Yeah.
you've created this series that obviously is super value additive and gives these founders a reason to listen to you, but it's also so insightful for you all to be able to hear these conversations and hear what's important to them. And I was just, it's not a, I wouldn't say it's a normal content execution that, like, either is brand driven and you're going out and saying things to founders, or even something like this where you're having a conversation with an operator one-on-one, but like you are just platforming and enabling the founders to talk to each other. How did that come about? How did you guys come up with that idea?
Yeah, that idea came up in a brainstorm session around content for like a big like 2022 Tydo content session we did. And instead of physical post-its, we used Figma in a Fig Jam.
Okay.
But
Same
it
idea.
started in a yeah, same idea. It started in a Fig Jam, thinking through. I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about these like just in real life experiences and then also like digital experiences, and how are they different, how are they similar, what can we gain from both of them. And then I'm someone who really, I love in real life experiences. I think they're so magical. There's something about like being in a room, the energy you feel, and it can be a miss, but also there are these like really special moments, and I
Mhm.
don't know like the way to describe them per se, but you just feel, you leave feeling so energized in a
Mhm.
way that no Zoom webinar or Twitter conversation can really match up to. And I've been thinking a lot about that, and just about how all these founders are so siloed. And you have this group of founders, direct to consumer founders, who are thriving on Twitter, who are having amazing conversations. And D2C Twitter is huge.
Yeah.
It's like it's such a niche space, but also there are all those founders who are not part of that conversation. And like why are they left out of the conversation? How can we bring them in? And how can founders learn in a way where they feel really safe and open, because when you're online too, there's always someone who's going to criticize you. There's always someone who's going to say something, and it's not a safe space per se to explore those
Mm.
problems and challenges. And I like look back on so many um key moments of growth in my life and feel like they really came from these in real life moments, whether it's like I went on an entrepreneurial retreat that was in person and like sitting around a circle, or just conversations in the classroom, or things like that. And
Yeah.
so we were thinking about that, and how to curate an experience that's really unique and feels really intimate. And that's kind of the impetus for Tydo tables. And we were just like, let's try it.
Mhm.
And we had a few ideas for the first series, and one of them was about CPG and kind of what's happening in the consumer packaged goods space. And so we went to Austin, and we had this amazing private room at a restaurant and had this 2-hour conversation with 14 founders and operators of these food and beverage brands. And Austin is a really interesting space to build a CPG brand. That's why we chose Austin. It was very purposeful. Everything about it was super purposeful.
Mhm.
I think you can kind of see that from the content too.
Mhm.
But we were in that room, and it was just 2 hours of like pure magic. Of You could see these new founders who are just launching like a food brand, or like a, yeah, snack brand on the side as they're like a full-time project, like product manager or something. And then versus like the founder of a massive like canned cocktail company sitting next to each other, or
Mhm.
like founders being like, I've always wanted to talk to this person, but he's never responded to my emails, and now I get to be in the room with him. Like, that's so cool. Or a founder was like, we're shelf mates at this store in Austin, but
Mm.
we've never met in person. And having those moments, and then from there, they've actually been able to, everyone in that room has built a strong relationship with each other. So there's a group of women from that conversation who now do like bi-weekly female founder gatherings where they brainstorm on their businesses.
Oh, so
And
cool.
then,
So communities are
which
spinning
is
out
so cool.
of even
Yeah,
that
communities
initial community.
are spinning out. And I also think what's interesting about it that you noted as well was like it wasn't a sales pitch about Tydo. Like Tydo was not a part of the conversation. It's called Tydo Tables, the series, and it's on Tydo, but in the content, it's not about Tydo, and it's about that merchant and founder perspective.
Yeah, so smart. And a couple things that you said there that I just feel like really resonated. One is, I feel like what you were talking about, the in-person experience has become even more magnified based on our experience the last 36 months or whatever, to where we all crave it so much that when you do have it, it's even more intense. Those feelings of, whatever, the magic, like you called it. And you said something else, that founders are used to. I think that we've gotten so good at communicating safely online because we know that everything is documented, everything is transparent, and so I can be attacked, pretty easily. And I
Yeah.
was curious if you've seen this, like in a few in real life things that I've done, and this is in a good way. I'm not saying like, but like people have said things that I'm like, whoa, oh, I wasn't expecting that level of honesty or depth, but it's because it wasn't necessarily just being typed, and they were able to express it and then give like context that you can't give online. And so anyway, it just created this entire energy that you, like you said, you just can't manufacture, even if it's a closed off, like this is great, but it's just so different when you're in the room with people.
Yeah, and you feel that there's more vulnerability. I
Mm.
think that comes out of that too.
Yeah. So okay, so that was the execution. And then how did that get distributed, or how did that get tied back to value for the brand?
Yeah, so we had that in real life experience, and then I went into deep writing, research mode, and also design mode, because it's like, how do you bring that type of experience that was so magical in person to a piece of
Yeah.
magical content? And I also think it's really interesting too, because we went from experiential to content,
Hmm.
and that's a really interesting pipeline to think through. And how do you bring that to then how do you bring the in real life to digital
Hmm.
is a key question. But oftentimes, so Tydo tables it's a gated asset, so you have to put in your email to receive the content. It's free, but I think oftentimes gated content can get a bad rep. And
Hmm.
so I was really purposeful with, like, okay, how do we make sure that this content is so valuable that people, like, it is worth it for people? And so we really put a lot of time and effort into not only the writing of it, but also the design of it, and then creating an entire content experience, not just like one piece. It's not just the report. You go to a unique website experience that's interactive, and then also each theme within that report has its own landing page.
Hmm.
So that's also another component of it. And then you have the option to either receive the full report on the homepage, or you could go to each theme and receive just that specific theme report.
Hmm.
But then you're put into an email flow where you get each theme one day after. So it's like
Oh, okay,
also,
cool.
it's really interesting where it is the full report, and that is the content is at its center, at the core. But then how do you create landing page experiences? How do you bring that content to life in email, which is also another channel too? So that's kind of how we thought about that, where it was actually building a full experience and not just one piece of content.
Yeah, there's a theme here where you seem to think very thoroughly through the entire through line of the content and make sure that there's those experiences are fulfilling to the consumer, but also, at least in this case, beneficial to the brand by getting their email or whatever other data. That's so cool. We'll make sure to link to that page, and if you haven't seen the Tydo Talks, be sure to check them out. Tydo Talks, Tydo
Tables.
tables. Um,
Yes.
be sure to check them out. Rachel, thank you so much for coming on and spending time with us. Before we let you go, I ask everyone, what is one content trend, one project, anything that you have either upcoming or that you're noticing personally, that just has you excited?
Ooh. I am really excited. I'm really excited about TikTok. I know that's like kind of a generic answer, but I think that there are so many cool ways to bring content to life on that platform. Um, and it's something that I've been thinking a lot about, especially from like working at a tech company. How do you create content on that channel that resonates and doesn't feel like salesy or
Have you toyed with it
um,
much?
myself?
Yeah.
I've created like a few just to experiment.
Yeah.
I'm definitely not a good like TikToker myself,
Okay.
but I think it's a fun platform, and you learn a lot by just doing it.
Yeah. 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 I'm curious to see, as it seems like it's hitting the level where good marketers like yourself are getting. I mean, not to say that everyone before wasn't a good marketer, but people are using it like very strategically. And so I'm very curious to see what that looks like, in terms of the executions. Like there's been a lot of spin-off brands, or little almost like content series, I feel like, that have gone on there, but um and more brands like what you're talking about are getting into it. What's your favorite, or if you have a favorite TikTok inspo right now?
Well, I love watching because I'm in D2C and e-commerce, and I love the brand side of it and all the storytelling. I love following Dolma. I don't know if you've seen her videos, but she does
Mm-mm.
these deep dives on direct to consumer brands,
Oh,
and
cool.
or like why did Glossier like lay off a bunch of people, or like why this works for this brand or their
Oh,
strategy. And so I find that content really interesting.
Yeah.
And that's someone and that type of content I've been watching closely because it's educational, but it just comes across so much better in TikTok than on
Entertaining.
other platforms.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Thank you again, Rachel, so much for joining us. If people want to follow along with you, your writing, all the work that you're doing, what's the best place for them to keep tabs on you?
Definitely Twitter. It's just my name, Rachel Cantor, and then an underscore. I would say stay tuned there I usually post about kind of all my personal projects and also anything fun that's Tydo related as well.
Awesome. We got to get whoever Rachel Cantor not underscore is to give you that username.
I know.
I mean,
I know
that's
that Rachel Braun and I were both talking about that because we're both underscores and we were like, we really need the
both
really
underscore.
need the full name. Yeah.
We'll work on that next time. Well, thank you again, Rachel. We will be following all the stuff that you do with Tydo and with your own brand, and appreciate you coming on.
Thank you. Thanks so much.